Slovenia, which is tiny, tiny, tiny little country. The number of inhabitants is for about 1/3 of Guadalajara, so you can imagine it's really small. But the problems which we are facing in our education and in our public life and in our cultural life are pretty much the same. All of us who are in our country involved in reading research and in reading promotion, we have to answer the same quite difficult question. Does it still make sense in the era of screens and artificial intelligence to read books? And what I will try to do now in a very brief 50 minutes or 40 minutes to answer this question. And the first thing which I want to say is that this is definitely a very legitimate question, because we have so many information technologies which are new, bright, shiny, and the question whether we need a communication device which is about 500 years old in all these technical, with all these new technical instruments, the question is really a legitimate one. And I will try to answer this question first from a very brief historical perspective. What we humans did when we become humans, when we learn to talk and to communicate with each other with words, is that we invented communication devices. The first ones were quite clumsy, but they improved from century to century, from clays to scrolls to books, first manuscript books, then printed books, and then to screens. All these information devices has two very interesting things in common. First of all, the storage capacity of these information devices was rapidly growing. If I would want to put a short book to clay tablets, I would need one quite huge bedroom to put all the text on clay tablets of this small book on the wall. If I would transcribe this to a scroll, I would need 2 or 3 scrolls. And of course, if I would create this book in a printed format, I would need just one little book. And of course, if I would store the text in my iPhone, I would need a very tiny amount.
Infinitum, exceso de velocidad.
Phone to keep this book safe in my phone. So what happened was that throughout human history, all these devices become more and more capable to store bigger and bigger amounts of information, and they become more handy, because for finding a certain word in a clay tablets, I would actually need to read the whole tablets to find it. I would be a little bit faster in a printed book, especially if it has an index in the end. But if I would look for a word on my screen device, I would find it in a second, because I could just use the search function. So the history of human societies is actually the history of development of ways how we can preserve knowledge and information for future generations. And this makes us different to animals. Actually, this is my cat. When I became university teacher 20 years ago, I went to a course and somebody told me that animals on slides raise sympathy among the audience to the speaker. So I picked up a stray cat in my hometown, and here it is, one of the fattest cats in Slovenia. And of course, she cannot read. I sometimes assume she can talk, because she can complain quite loudly when we fail to serve the dinner at the exact time when she expected. And she understands 2 or 3 words. Food, and sometimes she understands also no, but only sometimes. But what makes her difference to us, oh yes, and she's very popular in the neighborhood because she walks from house to house and explains to the people that she hasn't eaten for last 3 weeks and please can she get some food. So she can communicate. But the thing which she cannot do is that she cannot participate in the cat congress in which cats would share knowledge how to domesticate humans. Because she doesn't have this capability of communicating knowledge and storing knowledge. Not to mention that she cannot write a book about how to domesticate a Slovenian neighborhood and then share this knowledge with her Mexican colleagues. So that's something what made us different. We have machines for storing knowledge. But here comes another important point. These machines also made us. All these information machines are, of course, made by humans. But the machines impacted us. For example, books learned us to read, books learned us to focus for a long time on a text, and books also learned us how to handle with complex sentences and words which we normally don't hear in normal daily speech. So books were very important in development our way how to articulate our thoughts and how to become more complex and sophisticated beings. And when computers appeared, this of course also changed how we share knowledge. Of course, the computers are great. They have great capability of storing huge amounts of knowledge and making it accessible very easily. In about 10 years' time, this is a prediction which nobody will remember, so I can say it, but I assume that in about 10 years' time, a lot of translation of such talks will go automatically. With all due respect to the two ladies back there who are doing their hard work with translating me, and I know that they will be always, I assume that humans will be always more sophisticated than machines. But for a regular conversation like how much does this cost, or can I buy this carrot on the market or something like that, for this kind of conversation, the machines will be very helpful. So machines, the computer machines are really changing our civilization, but they also changed the ways how we react and how we think. The screens made us something what we call multitasking. Multitasking is perhaps a wrong word, because what humans cannot do many things at the same time, but what we can do is that we can change the things which we are doing in very fast sequences. So what we can do is that we do a lot of things one after another in the burst of high attention span. And that's one of the cognitive capabilities which we developed by using screen media. We didn't have this when we started to use the books, and we didn't have this even 30 years ago when computers were not omnipresent. So the question is, what do we gain in this screen civilization by reading books? And what do we lose? And this is now a very serious proposition. What do we lose if AI reads books instead of us and makes a very short, simple summaries of the books which it reads, and it then communicates to us? This is, I think, a very serious question. What do we lose if we start reading books and we let AI doing this instead of us? Of course, I believe that AI can be a brilliant search machine, much more sophisticated than Google or Bing now. They will help us with these abbreviations to find books which we want to read and find the topics which we are interested about, but they will not replace our brains. And with next 3-4 slides, I will try to show you what happens if we stop reading longer and complex texts. I'm coming from Europe, and Europe is full of strange, bizarre languages. And one of the things which I like to do is that I collect strange words. For example, this is a village in Poland. I plan to go to holidays one day there because I'm talking about them in almost every public lecture. And I would say not a single normal person can read this. I mean, Polish can, of course, but nobody who's not Polish cannot make a word out of this. Why? Because we are not trained in speaking Polish and we are not trained in reading Polish. And here comes a very nice word, a Slovenian word. Jesenice is a small town in Slovenian Alps, but again, one of the funniest things which happened to me when I was once hiking in the Alps, I met an English hiker, and he asked me, "Can you tell me the way to Jesenice?" I said, "What? There is no Jesenice in Slovenia." And of course, he read this name by using American spelling. So he was not familiar with Slovenian language. And here comes my favorite. This is perhaps one of the longest words in the world. It comes from Icelandic, and it describes a tool which people in Iceland use when there is -40, bloody hell how cold it is, and they need something to make their cars run. So this helps to defrost the machine. It's a very funny tool, and you know, again, for somebody from Iceland, this would be a nanosecond to read this word. But for us, I mean, who can read this? That Polish word is at least short, but this is terrible. Why I'm showing this to you? Because, and that's I think a very important point, a person who is not trained in reading, a person who is not reading automatically, is having this kind of problems in their own language. And in European Union, about 20% of people are having this kind of problems in their own language. It differs from country to country, of course. And the problem which these people have is that when they try to read a word, they must go letter by letter, and they use all their working memory to figure out what's the meaning of the word. And then they go to the next word and to the next word, and they just lose the capacity of their working memory to understand the whole sentence. So these are the people who have problems with reading the recipes, with reading the news, with reading the instructions, simple instructions for engines which we used and machines which we used, for appliances which we used in our households. And this is a serious problem. And this problem, of course, happens if the person doesn't read. And book reading is one of many trainings how to automatize this reading capacity. But this can be learned by reading from screens too. The main issue, I think, with book reading is that actually there is not a single media besides books, perhaps some sophisticated journals and magazines, of course, but there is no other media than books and some other media for storing the long linear texts that brings to us such a big number of different words. So by reading books, we broaden our vocabulary. And then this is again very important, because if I know only 2 or 3 words like my cat, I can get food from sympathetic people, but I cannot get engaged in a sophisticated conversation. And the point is, of course, less words I know, less sophisticated conversations can I have, and simpler my understanding of complex social and natural problems is. So the number of words, and of course knowing that words change meanings in different contexts, which again I learned from reading books, without this kind of knowledge, I can really not think and discuss the complex problems of contemporary world. Being this migration, being this Russian and Ukrainian war, being this Gaza situation, being this climate change. So book reading is something what trains us in understanding the complex world we live in. And the point which I want to make is that up till now, I don't know for any other media that does this better than books. Books are something what enables us humans to communicate complex problems. And this is true, I think, for all contemporary civilizations. We cannot get rid of books if we want to stick to complex thinking. Another thing which is quite important is, of course, empathy and perspective taking. Unfortunately, these are not my sponsors. I would love them to be, but they are not. But actually, these are the tech companies which were run from their very beginning, when they were from smallness to greatness, by people whose basic training, academic training, was in humanities or in social sciences. There was a study done once upon a time on LinkedIn, because they wanted to find out how many graduates from Ivy League are among the people who run the most successful technological companies, and how many of them have degrees from computer sciences and economy. And of course, they find out that there are quite a few Ivy League graduates among these top tech managers, but to their surprise, there were more of them with humanities and social sciences degrees than people with economics and computer sciences degrees from with undergraduate degrees. Of course, for graduate studies, they did something else usually. But basically, they were trained in humanities and in social sciences, what means that they were book readers. And by reading books, they, of course, developed empathy, which is crucial for being a good manager. Because you cannot be a good manager without understanding how your colleagues think, without understanding why they don't want to do something. And of course, without empathy as a manager, you are not able to listen to them when they try to explain you that you want to do something stupid. So empathy, of course, is very important in private life, because it's much easier to communicate with your beloved ones if you're empathetic to them. And when I talk about this with my students, they usually say, but we can get empathic also by watching Netflix series. Well, yes and no. Yes, because there is a certain empathy when you watch a movie too, but the cognitive and emotional engagement is much higher when you read the book. Because when you are reading a book, you are creating in your head the whole story. You can stop if you need to think about something. You can go back in the text if you want to check something. You can quarrel with the hero. When I was way back in previous century in high school, I had quite a few quarrels with Anna Karenina from Tolstoy's novel. And because I didn't like some things which she did, but never mind. And this could not be done when you're watching a series or a movie. So the experience when you read is much more intense. So I would say that book reading is a kind of a perfect training for empathy and perspective taking. And besides engaging in an interesting story, you also develop capabilities which can help you a lot in your professional or private life. Another thing which is very important is, and this is something what was not the case 40 years ago, it became the case now. We are indeed having a problem with focus. If we use only screen media, we don't develop this capability to focus on something with our thoughts and to analyze it in our brains. I'm not saying that multitasking is not okay. It helps us to, to swim in the huge sea of information, but when we want to go in depth, to understand deeper something what we find on the surface, then we need to focus. And we need to be capable to maintain this focus for 3 or 4 hours. One of the problems which I'm seeing now sometimes with my students is that this is a serious issue for them. 40 years ago it was not. We were capable of sitting with our books and studying for 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hours. But for these generations who trained their mind by screens, this is actually becoming an issue. And when we were discussing these things at the last Frankfurt Book Fair, where Slovenia was guest of honor, and we put the problems of higher level readings into the focus of our program, one of my Norwegian colleagues explained to me that they introduced a special course at Oslo University, which is called deep reading. And what they do is that they lock themselves with students to a classroom and they read for 4 hours together, focusing. Because this is an ability which is not there anymore, and I think which is very important for the developing the ability of creative and analytical thinking. Because without focus and without broad and deep vocabulary, we cannot think analytically. And actually this shows a little bit in this chart, which compares, these are the first 10 countries in the world regarding the size of the home libraries. And then I looked at how high these countries are in Global Innovation Index, which is calculated by WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization in Geneva. They use a few hundred indicators. It's a very complicated math, but they want to figure out how innovative a society is in science, culture, research, and economy. And the second is World Happiness Ranking. This is something an expression which I don't like very much, because I have an uncle back home who is very happy when he sees a bottle of wine, but when the bottle empties, he becomes quite dissatisfied with life. So I would prefer to call this a kind of a well-being index, because it's very simple. It asks people, do you have a network of people to which you can rely if something bad happens in your life? How many times did you laugh in the last 24 hours? And then they somehow weighted these results with the amount of corruption in society and with the number of deaths of newborn babies, because the corruption and is an indicator of the level of crime in a society. And in the societies where there is a lot of crime, people are not very happy. And the number of deaths among newborn babies shows how good the health system in a given country is. And as you can see from this very simple chart, about 6 or 7 countries with biggest home libraries are at the top on these two both indexes among top 20 countries. I'm not saying that there is a causal relationship. This is a correlation. But actually the correlation is so high that it allows hypothesizing that the societies in which there is more readers are more innovative and more happy for their inhabitants. But, this is a very important but, reading does not necessarily make us better people. These guys, these 3 guys, actually are the 3 biggest mass murderers in 20th century. Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, and Mao Zedong. And they were both book readers. Hitler was even an author of a best-selling book called Mein Kampf, which is responsible for the death of quite a few million people in Europe and wider. And Mao Zedong was even a poet. So they were book readers. But, and that's an important point which I want to make, they were very simple book readers. They were not capable of developing empathy towards people who were different than them, and they were also not capable of developing critical and analytical thinking. Otherwise, they would not be running the empires which had quite a significant problems, and they would not kill tens of millions of people from their countries. So, the point is that book reading is not good per se. What these 3 guys did was that they locked the entire populations into a kind of information bubble by using analog media of their era. They're actually doing the same what we do today on Twitter and Facebook, X and Facebook, when we communicate only with our friends. But that's not that dangerous, because there are many bubbles in our countries. But in their country, there was just one bubble, which was totally unsympathetic and unempathic to everybody who was not a part of their ideological universum. So reading does not necessarily make us better people, but without book reading, our chances of success are practically nil. So, reading is not an activity which automatically improves societies or persons. But, and that's one of my main points, without book reading, we practically have no chance. To make things very simple, a simple person remains a simple person regardless what kind of brilliant devices he or she uses. Because she or he doesn't have a knowledge in their heads which would enable them to do brilliant things with all these digital technologies. And book reading is actually one of the crucial training activities for focus, attention, empathy, vocabulary, building and analytical thinking. Without these capabilities, we are not able to use all these brilliant devices on ways which would empower and enrich us. And that's my main point. We need actually for survival both. Screen media and book reading train us in two different abilities which are crucial for survival in contemporary world. We need information technologies because we can create brilliant things with them. But without having something in here, we cannot do these brilliant things. And we can develop our brains only by book reading. And here I will make a rather unpopular point. What really matters in all this is something what I call higher level reading. And higher level reading is not skimming, of course. Higher level reading is usually not immersed reading of genre fiction, although if these texts are sophisticated enough, they could also be. And higher level reading is not listening to audiobooks and podcasts. Because when we listen to audio, we don't read. We use our ears, and the problem which we have with audio is that we cannot modify the speed of narration to our thoughts. And when we listen to audio, we usually, I mean, it's possible to do it, but the research showed that nobody is doing this. We don't stop when we want to think something in the text, and we don't move back to look for something in the text what we would like to check, because there are no markers like they exist in printed books, and there are no search devices like they exist in digital text. So audio and podcasts are great for light content, but not for the complicated one, which is actually necessary for higher level reading, which is actually reading of long and complex texts about complex problems, which require intellectual patience and which force us to self-questioning, train us in perspective-taking, and require understanding of rules of logic. That's the most important form of reading for developing critical and analytical thinking, on which the development of our societies depend. And this is last 2 minutes. 1 minute for self-promotion. This is Ljubljana Reading Manifesto, which you can find on this website. We presented it at the Frankfurt Book Fair. It was written by 4 European reading researchers, besides myself, Adrian van der Wel from Leiden University, André Schüller-Zwirlein from Regensburg University, and Anne Mangen from Oslo University. And in this manifesto, we make the point that higher level reading is actually crucial activity for developing critical and analytical thinking, and for in this way, for survival of our societies. Manifesto was signed by very different people like Margaret Atwood, European Nobel Prize winner from Zhbdzlo, Olga Tokarczuk. She's not from that village, but from somewhere near. And by Slavoj Žižek, the crazy Slovenian philosopher, and by many other important European and global writers. And just this Friday, it was presented in the meeting of European cultural ministers, and about half of the ministers already supported the manifesto, and the others are discussing to do this. And of course, it was supported by International Publishing Association, Federation of European Publishers, PEN International, EB, EUREAD, German Academy for Literature and Language, and so on. So this is now quite an important European initiative, with which we want to persuade people that they should not give away their books. They should not give away this complex, difficult reading, which is sometimes even more difficult because our brains are becoming too trained for skimming, and we have problems with switching between the two modes. By the way, I will be talking, and this is the last 10 seconds for self-promotion, I will be talking about the Reading Manifesto tonight at 8 o'clock at the European Union big stage. And this is the last self-promotional part. That's my book in Spanish, which can be bought on Amazon, of course. Thank you for listening to me. Well, if there are any special questions, I can answer. I have this brilliant device here with human translators behind me, so you can ask in Spanish, of course. The mic is coming.
Hola, buenos días, muchas gracias. Me pareció muy interesante su conferencia. Lo que yo quiero preguntar es, habla de lecturas complejas. ¿A qué se refiere usted con lecturas complejas y qué opina sobre las nuevas formas de leer de los jóvenes, de los cómics, de las mangas y de todo lo nuevo que está saliendo? Me gustaría saber su opinión al respecto.
Well, I read comics too, as a matter of fact. I like them quite a lot, but with the complex reading, I really mean reading of these long texts, which are in which, by reading which we develop understanding of new words, by reading which we develop understanding complex sentences and using them. And this is something what cannot be done by reading comics. So comics are perfectly okay for leisure. They're also perfectly okay for introducing somebody into the reading, but we actually don't reach our goal if we stick to this. And because of these reasons, I'm also quite skeptical about something what is now very popular in Europe, the simplifications. No, it's okay if you simplify Milton's Paradise Lost and if you understand the content, but simplifying everything and saying people can graduate at the university or from the high school only by reading simplified versions, this just doesn't work. Because you don't, what matters in this process are not only stories, but also the very process of reading.
¿Qué tal? Buen día. Me pareció muy interesante la conferencia, sobre todo en lo que menciona que tener las herramientas no basta, o sea, también hay que saber utilizarlas adecuadamente. Y bueno, creo que varios maestros tenemos este problema en las aulas, que los chicos tienen al alcance de la mano literalmente un aparatito que les hace la tarea, y la inteligencia artificial se ha malinterpretado y se ha utilizado de mala manera para que ahora los chicos hagan trampa en sus tareas, no lean adecuadamente los textos que les estamos dejando, no hagan sus actividades. Entonces, ¿cómo podemos nosotros aplicar de manera mucho más precisa y eficiente el uso de estas tecnologías? ¿O qué es lo que usted pronostica que se pueda, cómo se puede aprovechar el uso de las inteligencias artificiales en el aula para que el conocimiento, los chicos se apropien de este conocimiento y no lo utilicen de mala forma?
I would say that's $1 million question. And by the way, you know, the first artificially created work which I got from my student, I recognized after reading 2 paragraphs. Why? Because there was no grammatical mistakes in there. And but this is really a problem, and I think that we don't have the right solution now, but my guess is that by, you know, we will do this learning by doing. We will have to experiment, we will have to test a lot of different things, we will have to communicate across the oceans and cultures to figure out how to do this. But again, I think the point is very simple, and this is again something what we discussed at the Frankfurt Book Fair, because now you have these translational devices. And some publishers say, oh, this is just good enough, you know? But actually, these translational devices are not good enough. What you need, if you use this kind of device, is a human who is much better than device. And my experience is, because I'm partly involved in publishing training and in translation training in Slovenia, my impression is that these machines will perhaps substitute the average translators and perhaps average copy editors. But for improving the text which will be produced by the machine, you will need a perfect, let's say, a perfect human. Allow me using a little bit politically incorrect language, a top sheet translator and a top sheet copy editor. So only the people who will be much better than average translators or copy editors today are, will be able to use these machines. And the message is very sad, as a matter of fact. If we want to achieve this, we will need to make education more compelling and more difficult. And this is a message which nobody wants to hear. At least in Europe, and I assume that here might be quite similar.
Hello, thank you so much for the presentation. I'm Carla Rodriguez from Dominican Republic. There was one, when you were defining what is this high-level deep reading, and you made a difference, and you said that fiction cannot be considered this high-level deep reading. And I wanted to understand, is there such a clear line that from like saying, okay, fiction is not reading, or can there be some fiction reading that can also be considered this high-level deep reading? And what can young people and adults can we still get from fiction reading, which still makes it worth it to spend the time and the hours in this type of books?
Perhaps I was not clear enough here. Fiction, of course, can be higher level reading. Pulp fiction cannot be higher level reading, although even for somebody who is learning to read, even pulp fiction might be for a little while a higher level reading. So fiction is very important for understanding the contemporary world, and reading complex stories can enable us understand a lot of important things which cannot be understood just by reading social science books. For example, we have this debate in Europe about a book written by a Palestinian writer, Adania Shibli, because she didn't, there was a lot of fuss. I hope there is nobody from Frankfurt Book Fair. Okay, you. Okay, there was a lot of fuss in Frankfurt about this because she didn't receive the award at the fair, because the fair quite very likely legitimately said that they cannot prevent the award being politicized. But you know, if you want to understand that bloody conflict, which is very likely more painful for us in Europe than for you in South America, if you want to understand it besides reading a lot of a good history book about it, reading this kind of stories is very important to understand the tragedy of the war. Similarly, like for example, the diaries of Anne Frank enable us to understand the horrors of Nazism. So, of course, fiction is higher level reading. Just not every fiction, but not every fiction. Just not every non-fiction is higher level reading. Of course, the Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler is very much low level reading.
It's in English as well. Well, I have two questions. First, as a teacher, what books do you recommend to your students, or what type of readings would you recommend, if not in Spanish, in English, for the exercise that you're proposing? And second, what's the name of your cat?
Oh, cat is Teresa. Yeah. And when she's naughty, she's Reza. Yeah, but basically she's Teresa. And well, my experiences with my students are very European, because we live in a language of 2 million. And what I do, because my students will go to work in libraries and in publishing houses and in similar institutions, when I meet the undergraduates for the first year, I ask them, show me what you read. And those who don't show a thing, they will very likely not pass the first year. But, and there are a few of them, because they know that they will get this question, because it's a tradition. But what is happening lately is that about 60 or 70% of them shows a book in English. And when I ask them, why do you read in English? They say, well, it's easier than in Slovenian. And because the books, there is much bigger choice, and the books are cheaper. What is all true. I mean, it's not easier than in Slovenian, but the choice is bigger and the prices are lower. So what I do when we read, I shift the attitude in the last 20 years, because 20 years ago they had to read books in English, but now they have to read books in Slovenian. And what we actually, but you know, these are undergraduate students and graduate students. We read a lot of books on management translated from English to Slovenian. And we sometimes read also fiction, rarely, translated from all languages to Slovenian. And then we discuss the language solutions. And we discuss, sometimes we even compare them, the books we read in, but that's very, I can do only with a few students usually this. We compare Slovenian translation and the original, and we try in this way to understand how sometimes the way how people reason and the way how people feel differs from language to language. And this is, I think, one of the most brilliant and intriguing topics. How does the language affect our feelings? Why are feelings in some languages different than in other? And we want to understand this kind of multicultural world we live in. But I assume this doesn't very much translate to your South American issues, because you are part of the huge sea of Hispanic-speaking nations. But you know, we are only 2 million speaking one crazy little language, so we need to do a big advantage out of this.
Hola, muy buenos días. Cuando yo empecé a conducir, a manejar, dejé de leer, porque antes me desplazaba de la universidad a mi casa y el autobús hacía 2 horas de ida y 2 horas de regreso. Entonces al día tenía 4 horas para leer. En ese momento opté por audiolibros, pero me distraía mucho por la voz, los carraspeos, las equivocaciones. Entonces no lograba concentrarme porque me concentraba más en los errores humanos. Y un día que trataba de explicarles un tema de ética a un cansado grupo de bachillerato, le pregunté a uno de mis alumnos, bueno, pues que a usted nunca le leyeron cuentos de niño, y la mayoría de mi clase me respondió, no, nunca me leyeron un cuento, nunca me contaron nada, mis papás nunca me leyeron. Entonces me di cuenta que cuando yo era niño y mi mamá me contaba historias o me leía cuentos y mi mamá se equivocaba, le decía, no, así no va el cuento. En el otro punto que mencionaba de Ana Karenina, en esa condición de atención, ese momento en el que Ana Karenina está en el tren y nos dice que no se puede concentrar en la lectura porque está pensando en muchísimas otras cosas, los conflictos que tiene, lo que está sufriendo, y uno como lector se encuentra leyendo a Ana Karenina, sabiendo que no se puede concentrar, pero usted se encuentra altamente concentrado en ese hecho. Quería saber cuál sería su opinión de ello.
I cannot answer this shortly, of course, but what I would say just two things. Parents who read to their children do to them enormous benefit. And of course, the trick is not only in reading, but also in the interaction. So you cannot put a smartphone beside your child and you put Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, and 3 years old listens to this high literature and becomes sophisticated. It doesn't work that way, of course. You have to read to the child and you have to interact with him. And the benefits of this are, of course, enormous. And what we are in Europe, for example, when we do this reading research, we find out that there are enormous differences between countries. For example, in Norway, about 80% of parents read to their children 4 or 5 times a week. And in my country, which is less culturally developed, this is done by only 1/3 of the parents. If I would catch a goldfish, that's I don't know if you have in Latin America this story too, but if you catch a goldfish in a pond, and then you put the fish out, and then the fish said, oh, let me go, I will fulfill your 3 wishes, and the third wish, I will not tell you the first 2 because they are very personal, but the third wish would be, let all the parents read to their children at least 4 or 5 times a week because the world will be better. In the end, after 20 years, if there will be still the world in that future. And regarding this listening thing, there is very interesting. I saw a study last year, somebody looked at Storytel, which is European audiobook provider, and most of the usage of the listeners are online between 6 o'clock in the morning and 9 o'clock in the morning, and between 4 and 6 in the afternoon. What means that people indeed listen to this when they go from work or to work. And if this doesn't distract them that much that they might kill somebody driving or they would crash into something walking, I think this is perfectly legitimate doing. But we should not call this reading, of course. This is listening, and this is totally different than reading.
Bueno, yo primero pues le quiero agradecer porque se me hace muy interesante la plática, y otra es de que yo como próximo docente de español y literatura practico con mis sobrinos, y en la práctica me he dado cuenta que los niños de un sobrino que tengo de 12 años le duele leer. Para él le duele leer y no le gusta leer, y su hermana de 8 años es lo mismo. Pareciera que les duele, o sea, que les estás obligando a hacer algo que ellos no quieren y prefieren estar en TikTok todo el día en lugar de estar leyendo 1, 2 o 3 páginas porque todavía las cuentan. Entonces, con ellos, que es mi práctica antes de ser docente, ¿cómo podría acercarlos a la lectura y que se quite esa idea de que les duele, o sea, de que ellos no quieren? Porque a los 12 años el hecho de que no quieras leer 2 páginas, para mí ya es algo preocupante. Entonces, esa sería mi pregunta. ¿Cómo puedo acercar a los niños de una manera amable a quitar como ese miedo que le tienen a la lectura? Gracias.
Well, I would say this is not $1 million, but let's say this is $500,000 question. And it of course differs from kid to kid. What I did in my private life, I grew up with 2 girls. I mean, they grow up with me, and I, in a way, grew up with them too. And what we did was that we tried to limit the screen time to them. With screen time, I mean the phone. And we try to engage them in doing other activities like, going outside, playing with them. And the other thing which we also tried to do was to teach them by example. And that was not that difficult because, you know, you can imagine my family members, older family members are all book readers, so they saw that we read, and that was it. In Europe, we have now in quite a few countries these issues when some headmasters of schools want children to not have the telephones in classes. You know, it's like in the Wild West in Americas. You come to a saloon and you put down your gun at the entrance and you go in. So in these schools, the kids put down their phones and they go to school. And what I found quite shocking was that this was, in some cases, bigger problem for parents than for kids. Because, you know, kids somehow, if they were forced to play with each other, they started to play with each other in the end of the day. And if the school engaged them in going outside, in playing outside, they somehow figured out how to do this. But the parents has this strange feeling that they cannot control their children if they don't have their telephones. And this is something what we are now dealing and trying to figure out how to handle this kind of parents who want to digitally control their children. You know, but so my point is quite simple. You have to do it by example, but sometimes, you know, you also have to do it with a little bit of the force. It doesn't go in any other way. You have to think very cleverly how to use this, but if a kid is spending, if a 4-year-old child is spending 6-7 hours using a smartphone, that's a disaster, not only because of this attention issues, but also because of the eyes. Because this kid will develop myopia when he or she will be 8 or 9 years, and it might be blind when he or she is 50. So that's a lot of reasons why screen time should be limited.
Hello. Hi. Well, actually, rather than a question, I wanted to make a comment about something that you touched in your presentation, which was about AI reading instead of humans, you know? And this has mostly something to do with kids, you know? Because I think there is a very distinct thing between AI reading a book and a human reading a book for a kid when it comes to empathy, you know? Because when it's a human being reading to kids, you can sense the emotion, you know? When they are reading, you can sense the feelings that they put into the reading, and even the facial expressions that they make help the kids to know to a certain extent, like how to react to a certain type of situations. I don't know. And with AI, when you listen, for example, to an audiobook, right? And it's read by an AI, you're not really getting any kind of emotion. Like it's a very monotone reading, for example. So you can really pick any type of feeling by it or from it. So yeah, I don't know. I just wanted to comment on that.
It's a good point, you know. And, what I meant by AI reading is by, first of all, creating shorter versions of text. And of course, AI is very helpful for a researcher when you are browsing through 50 books. You can get summaries done by AI, and then you can decide whether you read the whole text or not. But for this interaction with children, there is only human interaction which matters. Of course, kids can listen to many things, but there is a huge difference between reading to a kid, and reading means interacting with the kid, not reading like a machine, but interacting with the kid and by using the all kind of machine possibilities. So it's human interaction what matters. It's humans what matters, not machines. Yeah.
Hi, good morning. Yesterday, I went to a talk that was about neurodivergent minds in literature. So my question is about what do you think about people who had problems, learning problems, like neurodivergent people? Like, for example, I used to have a ADHD student, so it was so difficult for me to at the beginning. So what do you think, or what kind of resources do you recommend us to for teachers and for us that we promote reading for these people who everyone learn in different ways, right? So I think we are visual, so for maybe we learn by listening. So that's why maybe people prefer audiobooks, because sometimes you prefer learning by that way, right? So but in schools, I think there are different ways of promoting reading, but I don't think they are the best ways. So in your opinion, for these students who struggle learning, what are the tools or the techniques that you would say could maybe get close to these kind of students?
Well, this is again very, how to say, a question which has a lot of levels, let's say, because first of all, not all students with issues are the same, so you need to find the best way for each student, how to do it. And of course, if somebody is not because of some physiological or psychological issues able to read, then listening is a great thing, of course. But saying that listening is in general a better way of learning than reading, this just doesn't work, because there were a few studies done in United States. Naomi Baer, an American reading researcher, wrote a book about this, and these studies find out that students who were learning by listening, they were very self-assured that they know a lot, that they learned a lot, but when the test came, they actually didn't know much. But students who were learning by reading were more critical towards their knowledge, but actually learned much more than those who were learning by listening. So for learning, reading is actually the best possible way, but of course there are always situations when you actually need audio. So the trick is actually in making the right combination of everything, and the trick is also in adapting the tools to the students' abilities. And here again, I will be again a bit cynical. Laziness is not a disability, so you have to understand that there are differences in this when you are modifying the learning tools to students.
Buenos días. Buenos días. Voy a hacer mi pregunta en español. Cuando estamos en este encuentro de promotores de lectura, generalmente nos enfocamos a las infancias y en pensar cómo promover la lectura con niños, niñas, jóvenes. Pero hablando de la lectura profunda, compleja, me parece que tendríamos que hablar de los adultos. Y al momento de estar, por ejemplo, en una conferencia como esta, yo tuve que obligarme a mí misma a no sacar mi teléfono. Y estoy segura de que muchos de nosotros no lo pudimos evitar y tuvimos que distraer nuestra atención de escuchar para ver un mensaje, para revisar un correo, para cualquier otra cosa. Lo que quiero preguntar es si en la Unión Europea hay algún estudio, hay alguna investigación que se haya hecho sobre la pérdida de esta concentración o las dificultades que los adultos tenemos hoy para poder realizar este tipo de lectura compleja, crítica, que ya pasamos por todo un proceso de aprendizaje. Si leer es respirar, como veo en el título de su libro, ¿cómo hacemos los que también trabajamos en educación superior para enseñarles a los que ya respiran a respirar diferente y a desarrollar esta habilidad de pensamiento crítico y después pensar en transmitirles esa capacidad a los niños, niñas jóvenes, que seguramente muchos promotores que están aquí les dirán, es que leer es muy aburrido porque tengo que estar sin hacer nada durante muchas horas. Y creo que estar en TikTok durante 7 horas pues también es hacer nada. Esa es mi pregunta, si hay investigaciones acerca de este fenómeno en poblaciones adultas. Y muchísimas gracias por esta gran conversación que tuvimos hoy.
There is a lot of discussion about this, loss of focus and concentration, and there are quite a few studies being done about this, but I would say it's still early to do any clear-cut conclusions, because actually if you, for understanding social phenomena, you have to do a lot of studies about the same topic and then use a meta-study to figure out what's really going on. That said, I would say that actually, to be totally honest, I wrote this book because of the teachers, because I had a lot of interaction with teachers, meeting them at different seminars and workshops, and they keep repeating to me that they have a problem because the children, they try to engage children to reading, but then at home, children are not supporting in this activity by parents. So actually, we somehow find out that there is also a parent problem, not only a children problem, and we want to persuade the parents that they are doing a lot of good things to children if they train them to read and to maintain focus. This is not against the smartphones and AI. It's just, the point is just that you cannot use this technology without developing a bookish mind, let's say. And there is not a quick remedy for this. This is a bloody marathon. And it's not done by politicians. This battle will not be won by politicians and by ministers signing this manifesto, but it will be won by people like us, who communicate with this so-called civil society and try to persuade people that they need to do this. And in Europe, I sometimes use this, I don't know if this is translatable to Latin America, but in Europe, 40 years ago, we started with campaigns for healthy living. So now a lot less people smoke, and people practice, they walk, they run marathons, they go hiking because they figured out that it's better for their health if they do this. They will live longer and they will spend less on medicines and doctors if they live healthy life. And my guess is that we are now with reading promotion somewhere where we were in Europe 40 years ago with healthy living promotion. We need to persuade people that their lives will be better if there will be book readers. And this takes time, sorry to say, but somebody needs to do it, and we need to start to be doing this.
Buenos días. Casi es lo mismo que acaba de preguntar la compañera. En México estamos ante una situación en donde venimos después de la pandemia, estos 2 años que muchos jóvenes, sobre todo de universidades públicas, no tenían el contacto con los libros, sino a través de la tecnología, regresan a aulas. Y esos 2 años fueron 2 años de retraso, no solamente en lectura, sino también en conocimientos. No estábamos preparados para poder dar clases a través de la tecnología. ¿Cómo podemos nosotros este vacío poder llenarlo? Yo lo acaba de decir, pero esto es cuestión de mucho tiempo, pero estamos en una urgencia porque hay muchos jóvenes que ahorita están por salir de la licenciatura y que tienen este rezago, no solamente en cuanto a la cuestión de la pandemia, sino hay muchos de esos jóvenes que en sus propias casas no tuvieron libros cuando eran niños, no existieron la biblioteca en su casa. ¿Qué podemos hacer ante esta situación? Gracias.
Well, here actually is the point where to an extent the state or local communities come in, because in many countries the pediatricians, when the mother comes with the child for the first time to the doctor, he or she gives the mother a book and talks to her for about 5 minutes while reading book matter. So this is one of the few possible things. But that's something what needs to be figured out by each country. I don't have any clear-cut advices. In my country, we do this. We give the books to the youngsters. We also organize something what is called a reading competition, in the way that kids in schools, each child can pick up a book. He or she needs to read it and then discuss it with the children. We organize visits of the authors to schools, which they discussed. And we read, these kids read contemporary books, not some classic 100 years old, because the children don't understand that world. The world changed so much, so that they really need to read the contemporary books. So there are a few tricks, of course, which can be used. And actually, to be honest, and this also shows in reading research. For example, in my country, we are very good in primary education. So kids who finish primary education, they have quite developed reading literacy. But then, bump, when they're over 14, we lose them. And we didn't figure out what to do with them. So this is something what is a discussion about in my country, what to do with the teenagers. And book talk is very useful. We try to persuade them that it's cool to be seen with the book, but still, it's a struggle going on forever. And regarding COVID, yes, that's a problem. I think we lost one generation or 2 generations with this. But again, as Tom Hanks would say, shit happens. I mean, look at the kids in Gaza or in Ukraine. They lost much more than our kids did with COVID. Thank you.